Super. Okay, I think we'll kick off then. So first of all, thank you everyone for taking the time to join for Techspert.io's inaugural webinar, where I'll be discussing the topic of how to harness the power of healthcare digital opinion leaders, or DOLs, for primary market research. So just to run through a few housekeeping topics to begin with. So the webinar in total will last 45 minutes, so we'll finish up at 4:15 UK time. As part of this, I'm going to introduce my two esteemed colleagues or co-hosts here this afternoon. I'll also just run through an initial couple of slides on what a digital opinion leader is, and just to set the scene for the ongoing discussion from there. Ultimately bringing together on why we believe, and hopefully you'll believe similarly, that using and leveraging digital opinion leaders is key to effective market research in healthcare and life sciences. Just to say, the webinar is recorded. A copy will be emailed to you tomorrow as well, in case you want to miss any notes throughout. And if you have any questions at all during, please drop them in the box to your right, I believe, and questions will be answered through the course of the webinar as well. Super. So without further ado, first of all, to introduce myself. So my name is Graham Mills. I'm the co-founder and managing director here at Techspert.io. Techspert.io was set up about 5 years ago, I think at this point, to try and build a better solution to identifying and accessing leading expertise and knowledge across the healthcare and life sciences. And so I'm joined today by two phenomenally experienced and established individuals within the healthcare industry, who will ask just to give a little line themselves, introducing their background. First of all, we have Chandana Fitzgerald, who is the Chief Medical Officer at HealthXL. And so HealthXL is a global health tech company committed to building a more connected ecosystem in the world around the healthcare industry. So Chandana, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself further.
Sorry, there are usual problems, but thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Chandana, and as Graham described, I'm the Chief Medical Officer at HealthXL. I'm running some of the core elements of HealthXL's business. And like he described as well, we want the community and the go-to place for digital health. And prior to this, I've worked as a physician in primary care and tertiary care settings. And I've also worked with a couple of other startups from really early stage to help grow them into full businesses. And one of those companies is actually a medical education business that I engaged with lots of KOLs on, incidentally. And we were trying to deliver some of this content virtually to various students and residents and doctors from around the world as well. So that's me.
And next we have Jennifer. So Jennifer, also a trained medical doctor, like Chandana, is the CEO of a company called Vanguard.Health. I think you bill yourself as the world's first full healthcare experience firm. So over to you if you want to similarly introduce yourself.
Hi, Graham. Delighted to be here. Very excited to talk about this topic. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Joe. I'm located in Boston. I, too, am trained as a physician. I currently work part-time in the emergency room, the urgent care, and a hospitalist setting. I'm really passionate about this space and the importance in the space, and my passion harks back to about 10 years ago when I started a social networking community for doctors that then pivoted a bit and provides digital interactions for doctors online and is used by the American Medical Association and the New England Journal of Medicine, among others. So that really kicked off my passion. And then I have a passion for digital health. And I used to own and run MedTech Boston, the first ever online publisher for MedTech innovation and digital health. And during that time, I built my presence online and really have been intrigued by the power of digital communication since then. So excited to be talking about it today.
Thank you, both of you, and very much looking forward to the discussion. So just to run through a couple of background slides and ultimately why we're keen to have this conversation today. So what is a digital opinion leader? And I think this is a term or a topic we at Techspert.io have seen becoming increasingly pervasive in how companies are engaging in market research. So a healthcare digital opinion leader is someone who's using online forums, mediums, tools to try and learn, engage, and really teach and educate individuals across the healthcare ecosystem about the different topics that, as we know, so rapidly evolve within our space. There's a range of ways one can use these online channels and ways DOLs too. But ultimately, I think some of the really impactful kind of forms of communication and engagement relate to how we define policy. So, for example, we know over the last year, policy around how we deal with pandemics has been incredibly important. And I think we've seen digital channels being a core way people learn and engage across geographic and cultural borders. Now, this topic, I think, is becoming very important. So some of these figures are probably not a surprise. Some of them might be more insightful. But ultimately, we know that biopharma companies are spending an increasing amount on engaging both physicians and patients through online media channels over the last few years. And this is a trend that's only increasing. As a result, we think understanding how to navigate online research environments becomes incredibly important to successful product launches, successful investment decisions, and similar. In addition, as well as pharmaceutical companies being interested in using it, we see a large number of actual healthcare professionals using these mediums themselves to both learn about new disease kind of treatment options, learn about new reimbursement paradigms, and ultimately just understand how their peers are responding to such a rapidly evolving ecosystem. An interesting stat there is 60% of doctors at the moment, I believe this is in the US, say social media improves the quality of care they can deliver to patients as well, which is massive. At the end of the day, what it kind of comes down to is that online information is trusted more, especially as it relates to healthcare. And it's also used to form the decisions, to form the basis of decisions about patients, pharmaceutical companies, and caregivers are all using. And as a result, understanding how digital influence occurs within healthcare and how we can leverage it to build better insights and understandings as part of our own business is becoming really paramount to success. So what we'll cover then over the next half hour or so is, first of all, just understand a little bit more about, again, how DOLs are fitting into industry ecosystems today, and what qualifies as a high-quality digital opinion leader. So how do we tell those who can help us really achieve the goals of our own projects versus sorting the signal from the noise? Ultimately, I'd like us all to think a little bit about how or why DOLs are used by companies. So where can they be positioned to support companies in ways KOLs might not be as suitable? And at the end of the day, what does this translate to in terms of metrics or output for the actual solutions we deliver to our clients? So what I'm going to do then, just to kick off the discussion, is maybe I can just ask Chandana to begin with you. So obviously, within your role, I'm sure engaging and identifying digital opinion leaders has formed an increasing part of how you work today. I'd be interested in your perspective on why you choose to engage DOL. So what's the value that they bring to you?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And when I reflect on HealthXL, we pride ourselves in actually having a community of people who we believe are actually DOLs in their own right, because they engage digitally as well. And what you don't know, you're just one phone call away from someone who knows. And it's really important, I think, to always keep your eyes and ears open, keep your ears to the ground, constantly learn from people who have been there, done that, or who are experiencing things as they happen right now. And really, I see that as a way that DOLs play a part, but I think what they also add additionally is a layer of credibility to that opinion. So I think that's the really important piece here, because everybody has opinions and social media is rife with all of that. And so what we do at HealthXL is we obviously support all of our customers who comprise of, pharma, medtech, hospitals, payers. So the whole gamut of healthcare stakeholders. While we support them across various digital health initiatives, it's really important that we validate what we're talking about with DOLs, with people who are experiencing this and going through it themselves. And in a way, this is a way for people to build on collective intelligence and learn from each other as well. So we're nearly orchestrating this. So for me, despite never actually actively using the words DOL, we've been doing that for a long time.
Which is always wanting to be a phone call away from someone who is credible and can give you these insights. And I think it's interesting how 20 years ago, digital channels didn't exist, right? So you wouldn't have had this opportunity, whereas now, obviously, it's something we can really grasp. And similarly, Jennifer, to you, so you've obviously built up a large online following and have really begun to propagate how we can drive policy decisions and engage via online channels. So for digital opinion leaders themselves, how do you how do you establish yourself, and how do you communicate your value and your quality within a certain space?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question. I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, if you're already an existing opinion leader in healthcare, what do you want to do? Where are you going? How do you continue to make an impact? And I have had kind of one foot in academia and one foot in practice. So one foot in academia, one foot practicing medicine, and one foot in kind of in business social media. And so my struggle and a conversation that I have with a number of my academic friends is, what is social media to us? Is it going to be important? Is it actually important in moving up the ranks? And that has been a huge debate, probably for the last 5 or 10 years. And we all talked about how it was complicated. I have always been in favor of, I think it's going to be the wave of the future. And I think now the opinion is now firmly in, if you are a classic, traditional, old school key opinion leader in healthcare, you got to be on digital. And we're seeing it filter in as far as like Harvard has it as one of the how to get to Harvard professor. So we're tracking it in terms of influence. So classically, your influence in classic academic world is, how much do you publish? Do you have a textbook? Are you publishing in peer-reviewed journals like the New England Journal of Medicine? And now it's really talking about your Twitter influence, or how much you're getting your message out to the public. And I think that really became a point of discussion for physicians during COVID, which is, how do we reliably deliver information directly to the public? And how do we have a bigger voice? So I think now it's well understood that all healthcare leaders should have one foot in digital. And I additionally had this older healthcare leader, you know what I'm talking about, the chaired a couple of departments, is like 75. He recently had to keynote a conference, and he was told part of the keynote is you got to put a tweet out there. So he actually got his granddaughter to help him put a tweet out there, because it was mandatory. If he's going to keynote, he's got to do this. And he was so cute about it.
Love that.
But to the point of, how do you become a digital opinion leader? Find your medium and find your voice. And then there's some standard best practices. Do you want me to launch into that?
I wonder, Jen, if, just to build on that, just given how things work today, most of us have somewhat of an online presence, be it LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram.
Not classic key opinion leader doctors,
Yeah,
I think.
true. But let's think about the crop of people that are, coming out of med school or so on today. I think almost organically, there is a path that exists that one can pursue to become a DOL, because your mode of engagement right now is predominantly digital.
I hear you. I would say, and I would also say, Boston tends to be more conservative, and healthcare in New England tends to be more conservative. In my work, I oversee a lot of the students, fellows, residents. So I actually am talking with them a lot. There's still significant hesitation about what does digital mean to healthcare and taking that step. Yeah, that's what I would say.
And so an interesting facet you mentioned is that a lot of people coming out of education now, they're already active digitally. So they're digitally present. How do we differentiate being digitally present from digitally influential? And what does influence over digital platforms mean?
Is that it? Go ahead.
Gwen, please jump in here. I think we have to, we can't mix this up with how consumer marketing would treat in terms of metrics of an influencer. It's not just about higher number of followers or likes on your posts, but it's also, we still have to retain the elements of a KOL, not in a traditional capacity, but it's still that credibility, that validation of skills, whether it's, it may not be authorship of X number of publications in peer-reviewed journals, but it might even be the ability to take what's already published, but actually put it across in an impactful and concise manner. It's an ability to influence and inform and educate patients and peers. It's also to look at, do peers engage with this individual and their opinions? Because that, I think, is again a stamp of approval of credibility. And then further downstream, definitely, how far is your message going? I think that's where the followers and those sort of metrics perhaps play a role. I mean, that's just off the top of my head, some of the essentials, if you will, to be a DOL. But I think Jen knows this so much better than me.
Well, no, so I think everything you said totally resonates. And I think the concept of a healthcare DOL is complicated and confusing to the outside world, but also internally, in that in a healthcare DOL, there's this pure number of followers. Is that useful? Is it not? Pure number of likes. Is that useful? Is that not? Pure number of impressions. Is that useful or is it not? I think to Chandana's point, when you're looking for a healthcare DOL, you're also looking at other elements being just as important and maybe even more important. And those elements are they credible? How do we know that they're credible? Do other classic traditional healthcare KOLs respect their opinion as well? Meaning, are they translating to the CEOs of hospitals, the CMIOs of hospitals? And are they giving consistently reliable, independent information? Because that reliability in healthcare is just so important. Like, it's way more important for me to be consistently, reliably, a little boring than inflammatory, which will trend further in terms of depth. And it's hard to capture and measure that. And I'll say that in that I recently launched a talk show just to explore, because we were bored. Me and a cardiologist friend at Mass General, COVID finally got to us. We were at brunch. We're so bored. We are not talking to anyone. We normally talk to thousands of people. And we launched it, and we don't do much marketing because it's just me and a cardiologist doing this. But we have this intense, deep following, meaning Boston Scientific the other day told me that they announce on their internal newsletter to all of their employees our show every week and tell them to go watch it. And then one of the companies that I'm working with, the only reason he got excited about the show was because he randomly phone called another venture capitalist who said, yeah, I adore those two. I watch them. But it's that type of depth that I think is just really hard to understand or capture in traditional metrics, which is incredibly important for healthcare DOLs.
Yeah.
I mentioned, which is using kind of traditional consumer metrics for what influence means, has to be different to how we do it in healthcare, because ultimately kind of the insights we're generating, or the depth of insights we're generating, is a whole new level. Linked to that then, so obviously we talked a little bit about trust in information, and I think we know that very often what we see on Twitter or Facebook or so on isn't trusted, or is often queried or inaccurate. Within the healthcare industry, what digital channels do you think are rising to the forefront as being the most impactful in conveying powerful and accurate messages?
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously during COVID, the last year, honestly, and everybody has a right to have an opinion, definitely. If you're looking at rising numbers in your state, in your country, you have the right to have an opinion about it. But I guess it goes without saying, everybody has become an epidemiologist now. And, there's so many tweets and comments on Facebook and so on. So that has probably, in a way, diluted also some of the platforms. For me, I think it's still all the same platforms that everybody else uses, whether it's Twitter, it's YouTube, especially if it's, so number one, what's the modality? Do you want to show videos? So if you're showing, small surgical videos or quick snippets of information, then perhaps YouTube and Instagram would be the way to go. If your target audience, based on what you're talking about, is predominantly young, once again, I'd go down the Instagram and TikTok and everything else route, which I think a lot of public health professionals have used during this time. So, but if it's a more text-based medium, perhaps LinkedIn. If you're targeting, if the education is for pharma companies and medtech companies, they tend to typically engage much more on LinkedIn or read a blog or read an article. So I think sometimes it's understanding what your message is, who your audience are, and I guess how big your message is, or is it bite-sized? So I think based on all of these, that's what determines the right channel. So there's probably no golden rule about it. And I've seen some DOLs across multiple channels, and they're quite successful across all of these channels. And I guess most of the doctors have seen a good Twitter, probably because it's snappy, it's short, they can do it on their rounds and it's on the phone. But those who spend more time creating videos and trying to create an impact, I guess, or educate patients, they're probably doing it at home, taking the time to record and upload it onto YouTube and so on as well.
Absolutely. So I think what we see is that a lot of the same channels do exist, but the way that which they're being used is obviously a little bit different depending on the message.
Oh, they're very different. Crazy different. Yeah, so I'm just going to make 2 points on that. First, I think what I've seen over the evolution of what is social media, how do we trust it? When it first launched, it was so much data, right? Like we are living in the age of so much information. And now we're living in the age of, we have so much information, which one is reliable and how do I most quickly find that reliable information? And I think what we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years is that information is so available that the general public is seeking brands as trustworthy, if they're trustworthy brands. So they've actually migrated towards liking brands. And I say that when I work with like classic brands like the American Medical Association or the New England Journal of Medicine or the American Psychiatric Association, they've all reported to me that because they've been a little bit boring, but because they've been so reliable in terms of their following on social media, when people read them, outside of the recent AMA controversy, when people read them, they overall feel like they're getting reliable information. So the general public likes trusted brands now, and they also like trusted figures, meaning if they can identify with you, so you as a person and as a doctor and as a persona who relates to them, or as a patient advocate who's a persona who relates to them, and then also gives reliable information, specifically if you already have some sort of credential. So being a physician gives you some sort of reliability. There's been an uptick of the desire to follow reliable information who also is a persona that is relatable. So that's what I think we're seeing in terms of how do you pick a DOL, in terms of how you're getting your message out. And then I think for me personally, and these are all moving targets because all of the social media mediums change all the time. So you have to kind of track where they're going. It's hard to be an influencer on multiple mediums. So in terms of best practices when you're being an influencer, and I, before COVID, did teach a regular Harvard Medical School class around this. Best practices of being a KOL online, or now called a DOL, is you pick your persona, you pick your topics. Typically, you want just 3 topics. So for me, my topics are typically women in leadership, digital health, and healthcare innovation. And then if you consistently just deliver good information about that, that's how you build your following. There might be certain things about you. So for me, the characteristic of being a woman and a person of color also resonates with my audience. So that might be something that you're thinking about as part of what your audience is identifying with. So going back to how to pick the medium, my medium right now, and has always traditionally been LinkedIn. So I have 70,000 plus followers on LinkedIn. Twitter has always kind of been a backseat for me, just for me personally, for what I do. It's 2 totally different mediums. So Twitter, in my experience, and it could be changing, is fast-moving conversations. It was great for conferences. A lot of scientists will get on there and in small niches have like study groups or grand rounds. Yeah. And it would be this tight, deep conversation that's hard for anyone else to follow.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating to an extent, and that it also offers up kind of diversity of thought, the diversity of perspective that might not be as feasible through traditional.
Yes. Yes.
Well.
So I totally believe in the democratization of information and allowing voices that are traditionally marginalized, that haven't had an opportunity to talk, to be part of the conversation. Just the beautiful part about social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's just so much value in getting a more representative understanding of perspectives within the field, as opposed to through only traditional communication and knowledge sharing channels. Which leads me to my next question. Maybe this is one for you, Chandana. So at Textpert.io, we see a large number of requests for people looking to speak to key opinion leaders. defined, I guess, through traditional academic or clinical credentials or very explicit familiarity with certain products or disease areas. Now, what's the difference between a key opinion leader and digital opinion leader? If there is one, so you can tell me there isn't. And ultimately, why are companies considering this inclusion of DOLs? Why is it so key to how they do market research?
Well, for me, honestly, they're not different at all. I think the modality of engagement or means through which they're making this impact or having an influence that's really changed. But I would use these interchangeably, and at some point, I think DOL will be the KOL, at some point in the future. So I wouldn't even say that there's really any difference between them, except maybe some of the things that we've actually teased out over the last 20 minutes or so between Jen and I. And what was the second part of your question, Graham? Sorry, it's slipping my mind.
But the second part is then, why is it so essential that companies are measuring and are using digital influence as part of primary research strategies?
Yeah, I think, like I said at the very start, it's so important to have your ears to the ground and what's really going on. I love the point that Jen made actually on, NEJM and Lancet and all of these reputed organizations, societies, and institutions are actually taking DOLs as a means to propagate some of the latest information. And if you look back historically, where do physicians or nurse practitioners or patients, for that matter, go to seek healthcare information that is reliable and trustworthy and regulated, etc.? It's really those avenues. That's where the continuing education happens for healthcare practitioners. That's where general information dissemination happens to patients as well. So all we're doing now is actually incorporating digital elements in which some of this is actually delivered. So you still have that same credibility and stamp of approval. And I think there are really great examples. If I switch over to a bit of an industry lens, it's so important for pharma or medtech to have advisors who are from these cohorts of DOLs, because that's essentially the new modality of engagement, I think, in terms of understanding a disease, helping deal with side effects, what to expect of a treatment, validating. And now that a lot of these companies are looking at digital health products and adjuncts to their therapies, you definitely need these DOLs to help validate the strategy, the hypothesis, the execution, and so on. I mean, Jen works with medtech companies as well, so this is all perfectly aligned. I feel like I'm creating a perfect beeline for her to jump in here and add to this.
Yeah, definitely. So everything that Chandana said totally resonates with me. I would say three things. I see a classic KOL, if they're not willing to make a transition to digital, especially over the pandemic has just accelerated this like insanity. So if a classic KOL is not willing to make the transition, or if they haven't made some sort of transition of having a digital presence, their relevance has significantly diminished in classic healthcare. You're right that you need all of the key elements of a KOL to be a successful DOL in healthcare, but we're also seeing these strange popping up of stars who already really totally understood digital and the communication power that it has and how to use it. And I see around me, because we see this transition of the older KOLs kind of being replaced by the mid-career KOLs. So the mid-career and young, and even some very young KOLs, if they can get digital and get an audience and an influence, and to Chandana's point, the key that classic publishers are struggling with right now is taking a classic peer-reviewed information and actually dropping it into the hands of not only doctors, nurses, physician assistants, but the general public in a way that they can understand. Their power increases instead of decreases. So the key is that understanding the digital transformation. So we can see younger KOLs with less influence, if they can get into digital and understand it, their influence just skyrockets. And the same with classic publishers. Once they get into digital and understand how to deliver messages in ways that people want to consume, their influence for them, I think, continues and potentially could expand, because the massive gap in classic academic literature, first, it's hard for me to read, so I can't imagine what it's like for a layperson to read it. Yeah. But if you could take that and then make it accessible to a wider swath of clinicians, but also the general public, that's massive. They're taking what they already do well, which is finding good scientific information, vetting it, pulling it down and saying, this is what's most important, but now translating it, which is the hardest part.
As you say, like I remember I used to go to these AACR or ASCO conferences where you'd have 10,000 scientists in one massive convention center. And if you happen to go to the right talk, you learn the insight from there. But it was really hard to really learn or engage at scale. And so I wonder, over the last 12 months, and I'd be interested in both of your perspectives, what has not being able to go to conferences, not being able to leverage traditional knowledge exchange channels meant for how people learn and how people engage within the healthcare space?
I think it's radically going to change how we engage and learn. So I think the concept of the DOL is not going away. Boston's opening up. We have one of the highest vaccination rates in the country now. I think 70% of our population has at least one vaccine. We're still hesitant. We're still not seeing like a massive conference or like 100-person gathering in 2021. So I think the concept of the massive conference is probably just going to totally fade away. I could be wrong, but now we're going to cross over 2 years soon. And I think this has really forced like biotech, pharma, med device to be like, what are other tools that I can use that might be less expensive to get my message out there? And I'm seeing them experiment with these like they've never experimented before. And that's allowing them to learn that the cost of getting their message out there, if done digitally, if done well, I think it has to be a thought out strategy, can be less expensive and more effective if using digital influencers, niche communities, tailoring the message and dropping it out in smaller chunks, right? Like no one likes a 2-day or 7-day conference because it's just overwhelming. And I think we all like a nice, pretty image or a nice, pretty video dropped out over small chunks.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think those who really copped on, to the benefits of doing some of these things digitally, it's going to stay, probably going to be a little bit of a mixed model. But I mean, gone are the days of that one symposium. If you're there at that city at that point in time, you are informed of the latest and greatest. If not, too bad, you're the loser. I think those days are gone. And the beauty of all of these videos or digital content is obviously that it's evergreen. You can always have it and go back to it. And even with, pharma, medtech, we've actually had some DOLs come and speak to their internal teams. And some of these prior to 2020 were so labor intensive because you would have people flying for a day to do a 60-minute presentation and then staying and spending 3 days jet lagged. I mean, the logistics of it, it's just crazy. And you'd also only be able to accommodate the team that's based in whatever, Princeton, whereas now you literally have people dialing in from all over the globe. And if you can't, no problem, because you can listen to it later on. And just like Jen said, I think it gives so much flexibility on, you can have multiple DOLs at the same time. They don't even have to be from the same region or city, and the benefits just outweigh the cons, I think.
Yeah, so I just want to underscore that because I feel passionate about that. That one, we're going to have more cross time zone collaboration, international collaboration, because our ease with using these tools. It used to be that getting an older KOL to get like on a video call was like impossible. There's a lot of logistics that you had to walk them through. But it's going to have a lot more international collaboration, a lot more diversity of thought. I think it's going to allow us to really come to solutions faster and that are more impactful. And then 2, the ability to allow women to be part of those leadership conversations. It's true. Women are still often the ones who have the childcare, who have to go home early, who can't make that late night dinner that somehow gets them into giving the keynote at the next conference. They can't fly out to the conference but now that we're allowing digital interactions, I think it's just going to allow women to be part of that conversation and it's going to really allow them to shine for who they are. So
I love that.
feel that that's important.
So even as we evolve back to whatever hybrid world we'll live in post-COVID, that's still being able to leverage kind of remote and virtual connections in a way opens up access to insights and individuals who might not be as representative as traditional models.
Yes.
Super. Thank you. And so, first of all, if there's any other questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll pick them up. A question, I guess, also to both of you. So it's kind of been brought up now, but we talked about how digital influence in education removes some of the more traditional barriers to exchange. And that could be geographical, it could be cultural, linguistic sometimes as well. But what do you think the kind of rise of digital influencers means for healthcare innovation in particular? So what does digital, an increasing amount of digital communication mean as it relates to driving healthcare innovation?
Yeah. I mean, go for it, Jen, if you want to go first.
Are you saying I should go first? I can go first. Digital, so healthcare innovation and digital, so I'm squarely in the digital health space, and healthcare innovation over the last year and a half, because of the pandemic, had so many crazy market forces on us. We had the biggest acceleration of telemedicine that we've had ever. Our payment system in the US changed. We now have hospital at home, with remote patient monitoring options. And that was because of a variety of reasons. That was an incredible acceleration that we never would have predicted 10 years ago. And we probably accomplished more in that acceleration of a year and a half than we have in the last 10 years. How will digital communication, or how did that influence it? I can't say, just because I think the market forces of a pandemic and delivering services that are life-saving while not getting people sick was the driving force there. So I don't know if I have an opinion if digital communication will accelerate innovation. In theory, it should, because in theory, we're now getting comfortable. There are major corporations who are getting comfortable with video conferences, and it's quite easy to have a video conference over 4 time zones. It's still not easy, but it's significantly easier. So in theory, my thought is it should maybe speed up innovation. I feel like innovation, maybe I'm just right now tired of innovation over the last year and a half because there's been so much change. And maybe that's why you're hearing that in my voice. But in theory, it should speed it up.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that as well. We still need a bit more data, I think, to prove this, but there's definitely the ability to interact, synchronously, asynchronously. I think just giving all of these optionalities ideally make this a more iterative process and therefore a more agile and hopefully in due course faster process. I think more than fast, it's probably, the need to actually go be in a place in the company of certain people, which probably was what was causing the protracted timelines. And if we're solving for some of that, potentially that could be an answer. But that being said, I still think people crave that in person. So it's probably a good combination of the two that we need to strike in terms of achieving optimal results, because there are some things that you would just want to workshop together, and maybe no matter the tools, doing it together versus virtually doesn't have the same impact. So I'd just say the right combination, depending on the use case, certainly should accelerate innovation.
I would just underscore that we've definitely learned that in real life, connections, collaboration, touching, feeling is so important. So we can't let that go. That's definitely coming back, and it's like a fundamental human need. So it's definitely, that piece is needed. So how to interweave that with digital is the question moving forward.
Absolutely, and I think one great point from that you mentioned, Chandana, is its speed is something it allows that was a lot more challenging before. And I think what we've seen over the last 12 months is when kind of there's pressure to innovate, there's pressure to be quick about it, and especially from public, especially from policymakers and governments and stakeholders across the ecosystem. So what it allows us to do in terms of speed, obviously, can hopefully be massively impactful. As we near the end, I'd like to put you both on the spot briefly. So I think a lot of our kind of clients, a lot of our people we engage with are very often consultancies, investors, or within business arms of pharmaceutical companies. companies. And they're now hopefully considering a little bit more how they could be using or including digital influencers and digital influencers as part of their research. And one thing we've talked about through this webinar so far is that credibility is key. And often there's quite a bit of noise you need to sort the signal out of. So if you were to put yourselves in the position of these individuals using digital opinion leaders for the first time, what would be your one criteria that you think is most important for them to be ranking or qualifying someone on how important or how influential they are digitally? So your one criteria. Maybe, I don't know why anyone on the spot, maybe Chandana, we're going to kick off with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, what I would do if I were a newbie trying to engage with a DOL for the first time, and I wouldn't go by just the number of followers and the likes like we've discussed. I think my way would be to contact a previous influencer that I've perhaps engaged with to get their quick opinion. If I had at least a short list to work with, I would give someone a ring who I really trust, who's a seasoned professional in the healthcare industry, and get them to help me out. I think that's probably what I would do, which is not the best way to set a metric, but I think this works. It's tried and tested.
Yeah, so I think it's a complicated, difficult question, or not. It's a difficult problem to solve. When you're thinking about working with a digital influencer, I think the number one question that someone has to ask is, what do I want from this person? Meaning, do they actually have the expertise in the area that I'm looking at? And then two, do they actually touch or reach the audience that I'm interested in? So my audience is much more like business, C-level doctor people. And that's also because I have a lot of in real life speaking engagements and interactions with them too. So one, does this influencer actually have the narrow area of expertise that you're interested in? And two, what are their opinions based on? Is it based on, and is that audience the audience that you're interested in? So for Jennifer Joe, you don't typically go to Jennifer Joe because you're interested in her ability to communicate to the grander lay population, but in my ability to communicate more with high level doctors or C-level people in hospital. Then to Chandana's point, you just can't use the traditional metrics. It's nice that Jennifer Joe has 70,000 followers, but are 50 of those thousand those followers just fluff? And I don't know what fluff is, but is it more important for Jennifer Joe, like if she puts something out, she has 10 CEOs of top hospitals who have actually read it, or is it more important for if Jennifer puts something out, 10,000 people that you don't really care about to have read it? Quantifying and measuring that, I would guess there are tools, and I thought that Techspert might actually have a nice data-driven algorithm way to track that, because I feel like people are actually tracking me now somehow, and it's hard to track me because I do have about 20 different handles that I measure. So I thought Techspert had some data-driven analysis where they could scrape my information, and I've heard about this before, and then see not only how much content I'm putting out, but who is actually like responding or reading it. And it might be that, hey, 3 CEOs of a hospital responded to this particular content, and that's more important than Jennifer got 300 likes on this other piece of content.
Yeah, I would actually agree. I mean, sorry, I think I gave a really basic response in terms of if I were an absolute newbie into this, but completely, I think like Jennifer suggested, a list of the metrics for evaluation have to be put together. This is how I'm going to validate the essential skills and reach that I'm expecting this person to have based on the objective that I'm hoping to achieve through this engagement. And then use someone who can help you find those, because that validation piece is extremely difficult. So that, I think, if you have a nice engine who can do that for you, that's your answer.
Awesome.
Yeah, so actually finding them is hard, and then getting those metrics on like who's responding to me, because it's hard for me to follow that too. I just have a gut sense from having done this for a while and checking in. But I thought, maybe Graham will expand on this, I thought that that's one of the things that Expert does.
Yeah, that's definitely something I can comment on. So I think you're absolutely right. One of the big questions is, how do we qualify these people? How do we make sure we're using the right and kind of trusted information to figure out who truly is an opinion leader and influencer and who may not be? And I think that's definitely something that kind of drives forward Techspert and how we try and understand this data. and it's hopefully something we can contribute to. So we're coming to conclusion now. We've covered a hell of a lot, excuse the French, but I think there's kind of 4 core topics or kind of themes I just thought were really compelling from some of the information you shared. First of all, it's not necessarily useful to think of a KOL as different to a DOL. Often a DOL is like an evolved way that many KOLs can influence, can educate, and can learn with their stakeholders. We talked a little bit about the diversity of thought and representation of thought that engaging DOLs can allow us to engage and learn and access, as opposed to through traditional KOL sourcing channels. We talked a little bit about some of the different channels that DOLs within healthcare might use, but very often it's via YouTube, it's via Twitter, it's via LinkedIn that people are learning. But just obviously the burden of accuracy, the burden of quality of information is extremely high within healthcare. I think at the end of the day, what it kind of comes down to from my perspective is that it seems to be a very important stakeholder that it sounds like is only going to become more important. We talked about like this is what's happened now, and you talked a little bit, Jen, at the very start about how Harvard is now using kind of digital metrics to define kind of your success and your ladder as an academic. And I think that's kind of perfectly illustrative of how important digital influence and opinions are and are going to be. So I realize we've run off, I'm terrible at timekeeping, but thank you both so much for your time, thoughts, and input here. It was really valuable, and hopefully chat to everyone again soon.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciated this opportunity.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.